Hello and welcome back, everyone. Dear listeners, I am scuffed from the get-go. Both OBS ran an update and Elgato's Stream Deck ran an update. So I am piecing it together piece by piece and hoping for the best. So all of my pre-described buttons are not keyed correctly. So huzzah! All right. I just wanted to say a quick shout out to Silver Wolf and Daiki Melon for following me in the last 24, 48 hours. I appreciate you uh, checking out my content and following along even when I'm not here. So, um, OBS is OBSing. I'll just have to do everything manually today, and that's fine until, I can recalibrate my stream deck. Now it makes so much sense. I was delaying making those updates, but here we are. Either way, I'm here, you're all here. Let's get started. So we are on to part 4 of White Fang by Jack London. Now, we are part 4 in the series. We're also part 4 of the book. And we might be part 4 in the chapters. We are. So today is 444. I don't know if that is something in astrology or, numerology or any of the other eclectic visionary stuff that's out there. So, I had no milk today, so I have not had any coffee. So cheers. No caffeine for me. Because I don't drink soda and I don't drink coffee without milk. It it would just be too bitter. Anyway, we're here. There's 6 of you lovely listeners. I appreciate each and every one of you. Let's get started. So we return to White Fang. Now, as a quick recap from the previous chapter, we know.
Dear great librarian, I am only hearing sound out of my left headphone.
That's not good. Okay. Bless. How about now? Maybe. Specifically, okay. All right. Well, I'll take it. Thank you. Thank you so much for one, testing the text to speech, and two, making sure that the audio is good. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Uh, Higara, thank you so much for giving a sub to Curious One. Longtime fan, Curious. If you haven't checked out, they're here. I was gonna say if you haven't checked out their content, they're like a kind of a diverse streamer. They have ASMR for like late nights. Occasionally, they have lots of League, I believe, and it's like League, but it's like almost like a chessboard. I don't know what it's called. Let's give a quick shout out to Curious One. Yep, there we go. We can see his content. Ooh.
I need to make some more point dumps for them.
This is an interesting clip. Curious.
Well, hello, all you beautiful questions and answers. Welcome to the Odding Hour. Let me see more of those emotes, like what Oates is doing. I don't think y'all.
Well, you got to hear some of his voice, not his amazing model. He has these incredible, like, H.P. Lovecraft tentacles that come out of the deep space of his cloak, and beautiful color palette of like this bright neon green and purple. Amazing VTuber. Just fantastic. Longtime fan. I found him, I think, through a Vil VTubers I Love stream, and I have enjoyed getting to lurk in their stream many times. All right. We are on White Fang Jack London, blah blah blah, part 4, section 4, chapter 4. All right. And as a quick recap, because I got distracted, as ADHD you do, in the previous chapter, we know that White Fang has fought. He's been like kept in a really small like fighting ring. He has been subjected to battles with every wolf, every dog that's ever come off the boat, and even a lynx, and he barely survived. Now, a man has come with the very first bulldog ever to be shipped to the Yukon. Now, the advantage that White Fang has is his, mobility, but a bulldog's jaw strength is nothing to reckon with. So we'll have to see how this goes, but I don't think anything. Yeah, we'll just have to see how it goes. I don't condone dogfighting in any capacity, but in the story, it's part of the plot. So we know that Beauty Smith is an awful, awful man who has been treating White Fang horribly at this point for months. So let's see what happens in the next chapter. Chapter 4: The Clinging Death. Beauty Smith slipped the chain from his neck and stepped back. For once, White Fang did not make an immediate attack. He stood still, ears pricked forward, alert and curious, surveying the strange animal that faced him. He had never seen such a dog before. Tim Keenan shoved the bulldog forward with a muttered, "Go to it." The animal waddled toward the center of the circle, short and squat and ungainly. He came to a stop and blinked across at White Fang. There were cries from the crowd of, "Go to 'em, Cherokee! Sick 'em, Cherokee! Eat 'em up!" But Cherokee did not seem anxious to fight. He turned his head and blinked at the men who shouted, at the same time wagging his stump of a tail good-naturedly. He was not afraid, but merely lazy. Besides, it did not seem to him that it was intended he should fight with the dog he saw before him. He was not used to fighting with that kind of dog, and he was waiting for them to bring on the real dog. Tim Keenan stopped in and bent over Cherokee, fondling him on both sides of the shoulders with hands that rubbed against the grain of the hair and that made slight pushing forward movements. These were these were so many suggestions. Also, their effect was irritating, for Cherokee began to growl, very softly, deep down in his throat. There was a correspondence in rhythm between the growls and the movements of the man's hands. The growl rose in the throat with the culmination of each forward-pushing movement, and ebbed down to start up afresh with the beginning of the next movement. The end of each movement was the accent of the rhythm, the movement ending abruptly and the growling rising with a jerk. This was not without its effect on White Fang. The hair began to rise on his neck and across the shoulders. Tim Keenan gave a final shove forward and stepped back again. As the impetus that carried Cherokee forward died down, he continued to go forward of his own volition, in a swift, bow-legged run. Then White Fang struck. A cry of startled admiration went up. He had covered the distance and gone in more like a cat than a dog, and with the same cat-like swiftness, he had slashed with his fangs and leaped clear. The bulldog was bleeding back of one ear from a rip in his thick neck. He gave no sign, did not even snarl, but turned and followed after White Fang. The display on both sides, the quickness of the one and the steadiness of the other, had excited the partisan spirit of the crowd, and the men were making new bets and increasing original bets. Again and yet again, White Fang sprang in, slashed, and got away untouched. And still, his strange foe followed after him, without too great haste, not slowly, but deliberately and determinedly, in a business sort of way. There was purpose in his method, something for him to do that he was intent upon doing, and from which nothing could distract him. His whole demeanor, every action, was stamped with this purpose. It puzzled White Fang. Never had he seen such a dog. It had no hair protection. It was soft and bled easily. There was no neck mat of fur to baffle White Fang's teeth, as they were often baffled by dogs of his own breed. Each time that his teeth struck, they sank easily into the yielding flesh, while the animal did not seem able to defend itself. Another disconcerting thing was that it made no outcry, such as he had been accustomed to with the other dogs he had fought. Beyond a growl or a grunt, the dog took its punishment silently, and never did it flag in its pursuit of him. Not that Cherokee was slow. He could turn and whirl swiftly enough, but White Fang was never there. Cherokee was puzzled, too. He had never fought before with a dog with which he could not close. The desire to close had always been mutual, But here was a dog that kept at a distance, dancing and dodging here and there and all about, and when it did get its teeth into him, it did not hold on, but let go instantly and darted away again. But White Fang could not get at the soft underside of the throat. The bulldog stood too short, while its massive jaws were an added protection. White Fang darted in and out unscathed, while Cherokee's wounds increased. Both sides of his neck and head were ripped and slashed. He bled freely, but showed no signs of being disconcerted. He continued his plodding pursuit, though once, for the moment baffled, he came to a full stop and blinked at the men who looked on, at the same time wagging his stump of a tail as an expression of his willingness to fight. In that moment, White Fang was upon him and out, in passing, ripping his trimmed remnant of an ear. With a slight manifestation of anger, Cherokee took up the pursuit again, running on the inside of the circle White Fang was making and striving to fasten his deadly grip on White Fang's throat. The bulldog missed by a hair's breadth, and cries of praise went up as White Fang doubled suddenly out of danger in the opposite direction. The time went by. White Fang still danced on, dodging and doubling, leaping in and out, and ever inflicting damage, and still the bulldog, with grim certitude, toiled after him. Sooner or later he would accomplish his great purpose, get the grip that would win the battle. In the meantime, he accepted all the punishment the other could deal him. His tufts of ears had become tassels, his neck and shoulders were slashed in a score of places, and his very lips were cut and bleeding. All from those lightning snaps that were beyond his foreseeing and guarding. Time and again White Fang had attempted to knock Cherokee off his feet, but the difference in their height was too great. Cherokee was too squat, too close to the ground. White Fang tried the trick once too often. The chance came in one of his quick doublings and counter-circlings. He caught Cherokee with head turned away as he whirled more slowly. His shoulder was exposed. White Fang drove in upon it, but his own shoulder was high above, while he struck with such force that his momentum carried him on across over the other's body. For the first time in his fighting history, men saw White Fang lose his footing. His body turned a half somersault in the air, and he would have landed on his back had he not twisted, cat-like, still in the air in the effort to bring his feet to the earth. As it was, he struck heavily on his side. The next instant he was on his feet, but in that instant Cherokee's teeth closed on his throat. Oof. It was not a good grip, being too low down toward the chest, but Cherokee held on. White Fang sprang to his feet and tore wildly around, trying to shake off the bulldog's body. It made him frantic, this clinging, dragging weight. It bound his movements, restricted his freedom. It was like the trap, and all his instinct resented it and revolted against it. It was a mad revolt. For several minutes he was to all intents insane. The basic life that was in him took charge of him. The will to exist of his body surged over him. He was dominated by this mere flesh love of life. All intelligence was gone. It was though he had no brain. His reason was unseated by the blind yearning of the flesh to exist and move, and all hazards to move, to continue to move, for movement was the expression of its existence. Round and round he went, whirling and turning and reversing, trying to shake off the 50-pound weight that dragged at his throat. The bulldog did little but keep his grip. Sometimes, and rarely, he managed to get his feet to the earth and for a moment to brace himself against White Fang. But the next moment his footing would be lost and he would be dragging around in the whirl of one of White Fang's mad gyrations. 1 second. My goodness. I don't know why. Oof. Something. Little tickle in my throat. Hold on. Okay. I think that's a little better. But then okay, try this again. But the next moment his footing would be lost, and he would be dragging around in the whirl of one of White Fang's mad gyrations. Cherokee identified himself with his instinct. He knew that he was doing the right thing by holding on, and there came to him certain blissful thrills of satisfaction. At such moments, he even closed his eyes and allowed his body to be hurled hither and thither, willy-nilly, careless of any hurt that might thereby come to it. That did not count. The grip was the thing, and the grip he kept. White Fang ceased only when he had tired himself out. He could do nothing, and he could not understand. Never in all his fighting had this thing happened. The dogs he had fought with did not fight that way. With them it was snap and slash and get away, snap and slash and get away. He lay partly on his side, panting for breath. Cherokee, still holding his grip, urged against him, trying to get him over entirely on his side. White Fang resisted, and he could feel the jaws shifting their grip, slightly relaxing, and coming together again in a chewing movement. Each shift brought the grip closer in to his throat. The bulldog's method was to hold what he had, and when opportunity favored, to work in for more. Opportunity favored when White Fang remained quiet. When White Fang struggled, Cherokee was content merely to hold on. The bulging back of Cherokee's neck was the only portion of his body that White Fang's teeth could reach. He got hold toward the base where the neck comes out from the shoulders, but he did not know the chewing method of fighting, nor were his jaws adapted to it. He spasmodically ripped and tore with his fangs for a space. Then a change in their position diverted him. Oh. The bulldog had managed to roll him over on his back, and still hanging on to his throat was on top of him. Like a cat, White Fang bowed his hindquarters in, and with feet digging into his enemy's abdomen above him, he began to claw with long, tearing strokes. Cherokee might well have been disemboweled had he not quickly pivoted on his grip and got his body off of White Fang's and at right angles to it. There was no escaping that grip. It was like fate itself and inexorable. Slowly it shifted up along the jugular. All that saved White Fang from death was the loose skin of his neck and the thick fur that covered it. It served to form a large roll in Cherokee's mouth, the fur of which well nigh defied his teeth. But bit by bit, whenever the chance offered, he was getting more of the loose skin and fur in his mouth. The result was that he was slowly throttling White Fang. The latter's breath was drawn with greater and greater difficulty as the moments went by. It began to look as though the battle were over. The backers of Cherokee waxed jubilant and offered ridiculous odds. White Fang's backers were correspondingly depressed and refused bets of 10 to 1 and 20 to 1, though one man was rash enough to close a wager of 50 to 1. This man was Beauty Smith. He took a step into the ring and pointed his finger at White Fang. Then he began to laugh derisively and scornfully. This produced the desired effect. White Fang went wild with rage. He called up his reserves of strength and gained his feet. As he struggled around the ring, the 50 pounds of his foe ever dragging on his throat, his anger passed on into panic. The basic life of him dominated him again, and his intelligence fled before the will of his flesh to live. Round and round, back again, stumbling and falling and rising, even uprearing at times on his hind legs and lifting his foe clear of the earth, he struggled vainly to shake off the clinging death. At last he fell, toppling backward, exhausted, and the bulldog promptly shifted his grip, getting in closer, mangling more and more of the fur-folded flesh, throttling White Fang more severely than ever. Shouts of applause went up for the victor, and there were many cries of Cherokee, Cherokee! To this Cherokee responded by vigorous wagging of the stump of his tail. But the clamor of approval did not distract him. There was no sympathetic relation between his tail and his massive jaws. The one might wag, but the others held their terrible grip on White Fang's throat. It was at this time that a diversion came to the spectators. There was a jingle of bells. Dogmusher's cries were heard. Everybody, save Beauty Smith, looked apprehensively, the fear of the police strong upon them. But they saw, up the trail and not down, 2 men running with sled and dogs. They were evidently coming down the creek from some prospecting trip. At sight of the crowd, they stopped their dogs and came over and joined it. Curious to see the cause of the excitement, the dog musher wore a mustache, but the other, a taller and younger man, was smooth-shaven, his skin rosy from the pounding of his blood and the running in the frosty air. White Fang had practically ceased struggling. Now and again he resisted spasmodically, and to no purpose. He could get little air, and that little grew less and less under the merciless grip that ever tightened. In spite of his armor of fur, the great vein of his throat would have long since been torn open, had not the first grip of the bulldog been so low down as to be practically on the chest. It had taken Cherokee a long time to shift that grip upward, and this had also tended further to clog his jaws with fur and skin fold. In the meantime, the abysmal brute in Beauty Smith had been rising up into his brain and mastering the small bit of sanity that he possessed at best. When he saw White Fang's eyes beginning to glaze, he knew beyond doubt that the fight was lost. Then he broke loose. He sprang upon White Fang and began savagely to kick him. There were hisses from the crowd and cries of protest. But that was all. While this went on and Beauty Smith continued to kick White Fang, there was a commotion in the crowd. The tall, young newcomer was forcing his way through, shouldering men right and left without ceremony or gentleness. When he broke through into the ring, Beauty Smith was just in the act of delivering another kick. All his weight was on one foot, and he was in a state of unstable equilibrium. At that moment, the newcomer's fist landed a smashing blow full in his face. Beauty Smith's remaining leg left the ground, and his whole body seemed to lift into the air as he turned over backward and struck the snow. The newcomer turned upon the crowd. "You cowards!" he cried. "You beasts!" He was in a rage himself. A sane rage. His gray eyes seemed metallic and steel-like as they flashed upon the crowd. Beauty Smith regained his feet and came toward him, sniffling and cowardly. The newcomer did not understand. He did not know how abject a coward the other was, and thought he was coming back intent on fighting. So, with a "You beast!" he smashed Beauty Smith over backward with a second blow in the face. Beauty Smith decided that the snow was the safest place for him, and lay where he had fallen, making no effort to get up. "Come on, Matt, lend a hand," the newcomer called to the dog musher, who had followed him into the ring. Both men bent over the dogs. Matt took hold of White Fang, ready to pull when Cherokee's jaws should be loosened. This the younger man endeavored to accomplish by clutching the bulldog's jaws in his hands and trying to spread them. It was a vain undertaking. As he pulled and tugged and wrenched, he kept exclaiming with every expulsion of breath, "Beasts!" The crowd began to grow unruly, and some of the men were protesting against the spoiling of the sport, but they were silenced when the newcomer lifted his head from his work for a moment and glared at them. "You damn beasts!" he finally exploded, and went back to his task. "It's no use, Mr. Scott. You can't break 'em apart that way," Matt said at last. The pair paused and surveyed the locked dogs. "Ain't bleedin' much," Matt announced. "Ain't got all the way in yet." "But he's liable to any moment," Scott answered. "There, did you see that? He shifted his grip in a bit. The younger man's excitement and apprehension for White Fang was growing. He struck Cherokee about the head savagely again and again, but that did not loosen the jaws. Cherokee wagged the stump of his tail in advertisement that he understood the meaning of the blows, but that he knew he was himself in the right and only doing his duty by keeping his grip. "Won't some of you help?" Scott cried desperately at the crowd, but no help was offered. Instead, the crowd began sarcastically to cheer him on and showered him with facetious advice. "You'll have to get a pry," Matt counseled. The other reached into the holster at his hip, drew his revolver, and tried to thrust its muzzle between the bulldog's jaws. He shoved and shoved hard, till the grating of steel against the locked teeth could be distinctly heard. Both men were on their knees, bending over the dogs. Tim Keenan strode into the ring. He paused beside Scott and touched him on the shoulder, saying ominously, "Don't break them teeth, stranger." "Then I'll break his neck," Scott retorted, continuing his shoving and wedging with the revolver muzzle. "I said don't break them teeth," the faro dealer repeated more ominously than before. But if it was a bluff he intended, it did not work. Scott never desisted from his efforts, though he looked up coolly and asked, "Your dog?" The faro dealer grunted. "Then get in here and break this grip." "Well, stranger," the other drawled irritatingly, "I don't mind telling you that's something I worked out for myself. I don't know how to turn the trick." "Then get out of the way," was the reply, "and don't bother me. I'm busy." Tim Keenan continued standing over him, but Scott took no further notice of his presence. He had managed to get the muzzle in between the jaws on one side and was trying to get it out between the jaws on the other side. This accomplished, he pried gently and carefully, loosening the jaws a bit at a time, while Matt, a bit at a time, extricated White Fang's mangled neck. "Stand by to receive your dog," was Scott's peremptory order to Cherokee's owner. The I'm going too fast. The faro dealer stooped down obediently and got a firm hold on Cherokee. "Now!" Scott warned, giving the final pry. The dogs were drawn apart, the bulldog struggling vigorously. "Take him away," Scott commanded, and Tim Keenan dragged Cherokee back into the crowd. White Fang made several ineffectual efforts to get up. Once he gained his feet, but his legs were too weak to sustain him, and he slowly wilted and sank back into the snow. His eyes were half closed, and the surface of them was glassy. His jaws were apart, and through them the tongue protruded, draggled and limp. To all appearances, he looked like a dog that had been strangled to death. Matt examined him. "Just about all in," he announced, "but he's breathing all right." Beauty Smith had regained his feet and come over to look at White Fang. "Matt, how much is a good sled dog worth?" Scott asked. The dog musher, still on his knees, stooped over White Fang, calculated for a moment. $300, he answered. "And how much for one that's all chewed up like this one?" Scott asked, nudging White Fang with his foot. "Half of that," was the dog musher's judgment. Scott turned upon Beauty Smith. "Did you hear, Mr. Beast? I'm going to take your dog from you, and I'm going to give you $150 for him." He opened his pocketbook and counted out the bills. Beauty Smith put his hands behind his back, refusing to touch the pro-offered money. "I ain't sellin', he said. "Oh, yes, you are," the other assured him, "because I'm buying. Here's your money. The dog's mine." Beauty Smith, his hands still behind him, began to back away. Scott sprang toward him, drawing his fist back to strike. Beauty Smith cowered down in anticipation of the blow. "I've got my rights," he whimpered. "You forfeited your rights to own that dog," was the rejoinder. "Are you going to take the money, or do I have to hit you again?" "All right." Beauty Smith spoke up with the alacrity of fear. "But I take the money under protest," he added. "The dog's a mint. I ain't a-going to be robbed. A man's got his rights." "Correct." Scott answered, passing the money over to him. A man's got his rights, but you're not a man. You're a beast. Wait till I get back to Dawson, Beauty Smith threatened. I'll have the law on you. If you open your mouth when you get back to Dawson, I'll have you run out of town, understand? Beauty Smith replied with a grunt. Understand? The other thundered with abrupt fierceness. Yes, Beauty Smith grunted, shrinking away. Yes, what? Yes, sir. Beauty Smith snarled. Look out, he'll bite, someone shouted, and a guffaw of laughter went up. Scott turned his back on him and returned to help the dog musher, who was working over White Fang. Some of the men were already departing, others stood in groups looking on and talking. Tim Keenan joined one of the groups. Who's the mug? Who's that mug? He asked. Weedon Scott, someone answered. And who in hell is Weedon Scott? The faro dealer demanded. Oh, one of them crackerjack mining experts. He's in with all the big bugs. If you want to keep out of trouble, you'll steer clear of him. That's my talk. He's all hunky with the officials. The gold commissioner's a special pal of his. I thought he must be somebody, was the faro dealer's comment. That's why I kept my hands off him at the start. My goodness. Well, I'm pretty sure in that context, White Fang did lose. Something he had never encountered that was built not for what he had been taught to do. But he's been rescued. He's no longer property of that awful, awful man. Hopefully, it seems that Weedon Scott's going to take good care of him. My hope and my dream, my prayer. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's progress to chapter 5, but a quick hydration break. Also, sorry for clearing my throat so loudly in your ears. I forgot that all of the Elgato stuff is still not connected correctly. Yeah. Please sign in for updates. Well, that's okay. How do I do that? Wow, wow. Houston, we have a problem. Okay, that's good. Well, let's see. That is not what I wanted. Well, here we are. I'll figure it out later. I just thought, oh, I can fix it. Yeah. Let's do the thing. That'll work. No. No, it does not. It does not do what it's supposed to. Let's see. Tools. Enable WebSockets. I don't know. I guess I'll have to figure out what Stream Deck did to break things. Yeah, I know. I just now I'm like fixated on it. It's like, why isn't it working? I don't know. I guess I'll just have to click this. Yeah, I'll just have to do it like that. Gotta love it when everything's scuffed. Huzzah! Well, we do the best we can with what we've got. All right, we are on to chapter 5 of part 4. The Indomitable. It's helpless, Weedon Scott confessed. He sat on the step of his cabin and stared at the dog musher, who responded with a shrug that was equally hopeless. Together they looked at White Fang at the end of his stretched chain, bristling, snarling, ferocious, straining to get at the sled dogs. Having received sundry lessons from Matt, said lessons being imparted by means of a club, the sled dogs had learned to leave White Fang alone, and even then they were lying down at a distance, apparently oblivious of his existence. Welcome in, Copyright 53. It's a wolf and there's no taming it, Whedon Scott announced. Oh, I don't know about that, Matt objected. Might be a lot of dog in him, for all you can tell, but there's one thing I know for sure, and that there's no getting away from him. Getting away from. The dog musher paused and nodded, his head confidently at Moosehide Mountain. Pretty good for the most part, Copyright. We've had a couple of scuffed moments, so it's been a little bit rough. But we endeavor to continue despite the shenanigans. So, yeah, the OBS had run a big update, and then so did Elgato's Stream Deck. Both of these are no longer working together as they should. I imagine I have to be logged out of OBS for Elgato to sync. I'll do my best, Copyright. Thank you. Well, don't be a miser with what you know, Scott said sharply, after waiting a suitable length of time. Spit it out. What is it? The dog musher indicated White Fang with a backward thrust of his thumb. Wolf or dog, it's all the same. He's been tamed already. No. I tell you yes, and broke to harness. Look close there. Do you see them marks across the chest? You're right, Matt. He was a sled dog before Beauty Smith got hold of him. And there's not much reason against his being a sled dog again. What do you think? Scott queried eagerly. Then the hope died down as he added, shaking his head. We've had him 2 weeks now, and if anything, he's wilder than ever at the present moment. Give him a chance, Matt counseled. Turn him loose for a spell. The other looked at him incredulously. Yes, Matt went on, I know you've tried to, but you didn't take a club. You try it then. The dog musher secured a club and went over to the chained animal. White Fang watched the club after the manner of a caged lion, watching the whip of its trainer. See him keep his eye on that club, Matt said. That's a good sign. He's no fool. Don't dast tackle me so long as I got that club handy. He's not clean crazy, sure. As the man's hand approached his neck, White Fang bristled and snarled and crouched down. But while he eyed the approaching hand, he at the same time contrived to keep track of the club in the other hand, suspended threateningly above him. Matt unsnapped the chain from the collar and stepped back. White Fang could scarcely realize that he was free. Many months had gone by since he passed into the possession of Beauty Smith, and in all that period he had never known a moment of freedom except at the times he had been loose to fight with other dogs. Immediately after such fights he had always been imprisoned again. He did not know what to make of it. Perhaps some new deviltry of the gods was about to be perpetrated on him. He walked slowly and cautiously, preparing to be assailed at any moment. He did not know what to do. It was all so unprecedented. He took the precaution to sheer off from the two watching gods and walked carefully to the corner of the cabin. Nothing happened. He was plainly perplexed, and he came back again, pausing a dozen feet away and regarding the two men intently. Won't he run away? His new owner asked. Matt shrugged his shoulders. Got to take a gamble. Only way to find out is to find out. Poor devil, Scott murmured pityingly. What he needs is some show of human kindness, he added, turning and going into the cabin. He came out with a piece of meat, which he tossed to White Fang. He sprang away from it and from a distance studied it suspiciously. "Hi-ya, Major," Matt shouted warningly, but too late. Major had made a spring for the meat. At the instant his jaws closed on it, White Fang struck him. He was overthrown. Matt rushed in, but quicker than he was White Fang. Major staggered to his feet, but the blood sprouting from his throat reddened the snow in a widening path. "It's too bad, but it served him right," Scott said hastily. But Matt's foot had already started on its way to kick White Fang. There was a leap, a flash of teeth, a sharp exclamation. White Fang, snarling fiercely, scrambled backward for several yards, while Matt stooped and investigated his leg. "He got me all right," he announced, pointing to the torn trousers and underclothes and the growing stain of red. "I told you it was hopeless, Matt," Scott said. In a discouraged voice. "I've thought about it off and on while not wanting to think of it, but we've come to it now. It's the only thing to do." As he talked, with reluctant movements, he drew his revolver, threw open the cylinder, and assured himself of its contents. "Look here, Mr. Scott," Matt objected. "That dog's been through hell. You can't expect him to come out a white and shining angel. Give him time." "Look at Major," the other rejoined. The dog musher surveyed the stricken dog. He had sunk down on the snow in a circle of his blood. It was plainly in the last gasp. "Served him right. You said so yourself, Mr. Scott. He tried to take White Fang's meat, and he's deado. That was to be expected. I wouldn't give two whoops in hell for a dog that wouldn't fight for his own meat." "But look at yourself, Matt. It's all right about the dogs, but you must draw the line somewhere." "Served me right," Matt argued stubbornly. What did I want to kick him for? You said yourself he's done right. Then I had no right to kick him." "It would be a mercy to kill him," Scott insisted. "He's untamable. Now look here, Mr. Scott, give the poor devil a fightin' chance. He ain't had no chance yet. He's just come through hell, and this is the first time he's been loose. Give him a fair chance, and if he don't deliver the goods, I'll kill him myself. There." "God knows I don't want to kill him or have him killed," Scott answered, putting away the revolver. "We'll let him run loose and see what kindness can do for him. And here's a try at it." He walked over to White Fang and began talking to him gently and soothingly. "Better have a club handy," Matt warned. Scott shook his head and went on, trying to win White Fang's confidence. White Fang was suspicious. Something was impending. He had killed this god's dog, bitten his companion god, and what else was to be expected than some terrible punishment? But in the face of it he was indomitable. He bristled and showed his teeth, his eyes vigilant, his whole body wary and prepared for anything. The god had no club, so he suffered him to approach quite near. The god's hands had come out and was descending upon his head. White Fang shrank together and grew tense as he crouched under it. Here was danger, some treachery or something. He knew the hands of the gods, their proved mastery, their cunning to hurt. Besides, there was his old antipathy to being touched. He snarled more menacingly, crouched still lower, and still the hand descended. He did not want to bite the hand, and he endured the peril of it until his instinct surged up in him, mastering him with his insatiable yearning for life. Whedon Scott had believed that he was quick enough to avoid any snap or slash, but he'd yet to learn the remarkable quickness of White Fang, who struck with the certainty and swiftness of a coiled snake. Scott cried out sharply with surprise, catching his torn hand and holding it tightly in his other hand. Matt uttered a great oath and sprang to his side. White Fang crouched down, backed away, bristling, showing his fangs, his eyes malignant with menace. Now he could expect a beating as fearful as any he had received from Beauty Smith. "Here! What are you doing?" Scott cried suddenly. Matt had dashed into the cabin and came out with a rifle. "Nothin'," he said slowly, with a careless calmness that was assumed. Only going to keep that promise I made. I reckon it's up to me to kill him as I said I'd do it. No, you don't. Yes, I do. Watch me. As Matt had pleaded for White Fang when he had been bitten, it was now Whedon Scott's turn to plead. You said to give him a chance. Well, give it to him. We've only just started, and we can't quit at the beginning. It served me right this time. And look at him. White Fang, near the corner of the cabin and 40 feet away, was snarling with blood-curdling viciousness, not at Scott, but at the dog musher. Well, I'll be everlasting gosh swoggled. That's a phrase. Well, I'll be everlastingly gosh swoggled. That is something. Okay. Gosh swoggled. Well, I'll be everlastingly gosh swoggled, was the dog musher's expression of astonishment. Look at the intelligence of him, Scott went on hastily. He knows the meaning of firearms as well as you do. He's got intelligence, and we've got to give that intelligence a chance. Put up the gun. All right, I'm willing, Matt agreed, leaning the rifle against the woodpile. But will you look at that? He exclaimed the next moment. White Fang had quieted down and ceased snarling. This is worth investigating. Watch. Matt reached for the rifle, and at the same moment, White Fang snarled. He stepped away from the rifle, and White Fang's lifted lips descended, covering his teeth. Now, just for fun, Matt took the rifle and began slowly to raise it to his shoulder. White Fang's snarling began with the movement and increased as the movement approached its culmination. But the moment before the rifle came to a level on him, he leaped sidewise, behind the corner of the cabin. Matt stood staring along the sides of the empty space of snow which had been occupied by White Fang. The dog musher put the rifle down solemnly, then turned and looked at his employer. I agree with you, Mr. Scott. That dog's too intelligent to kill. And on that note, we are just about an hour and 50 minutes into the stream. We're 2 chapters in, and I am due for an ad break. So I'm going to go ahead and, because I don't have 5 minutes to read. 5 minutes is what it would, I would need more than 5 minutes to read this next chapter. So I will go ahead and just put us on a quick ad break, which I'll have to click through the things to make sure that I do. But let's take a quick 3-5 minute ad break real quick. I'll refill my water, continue to hydrate. And as a friendly reminder, dear listeners, hydrate, caffeinate, grab a snack, do whatever you need to be comfortable. This is an interesting story, and we've gotten through, I feel, the bad of it. And now White Fang has hope. He doesn't know it yet, but I think Mr. Scott and Matt are going to do good by him. And we'll have to see where this goes. So, dear listeners, hang on tight. We'll be back very shortly. Okay, I think we should be good. I believe um, up and running. Yes, okay. Like I said, it's a little bit tougher now. You get used to something like having the availability of the convenience of Stream Deck, and not having it creates this whole new set of problems. Hey, Mr. Bear, how are you doing? Yes, I am indeed back. Um, Yeah, Elgato and Stream Deck. If you weren't here earlier, OBS just ran a 30.1.0 update, and that has disconnected everything from Stream Deck. That, or the fact that Elgato just ran a big update as well, to 6 point something something something. I don't know what the numbers are, but they are no longer talking to each other. So I'm gonna have to muck around with that after I finish reading today. Yeah, I mean, at least it's all happening at once, I suppose. But yeah, from the get-go, we're scuffed. And unfortunately, I even had to clear my throat loudly because my mute button doesn't work. Because I run a Shure SM7B, and there is no mute button. This is a beautiful, wonderful, warm mic that is incredibly quiet. Because it's like, it starts, I think, 40 decibels below normal range, but it is smooth, it's warm, it is a compliment to my voice, but it doesn't project very loudly. But there's nothing even remotely like a mute button on this. And so I'd had one programmed into the Stream Deck that now currently is not working. So anyway, 1 second, set my water bottle a little closer. Okay, now I have it. I have two kinds of water. I have smart water with blackberry and strawberry, and good old fashioned plain old water. So, fun times. No caffeine for me today, though. With no milk, no caffeine. Am the saddest tiger. Yeah. Need to feel more vexed in your life? Check out my other socials and past VODs on my YouTube on my Linktree, which it did not post. Good job, Stream Elements. Good job. Golly, it's just all of the scuff today. Okay. Where is my Linktree? Blah blah blah. Something something. I'll post that in case anybody wants to follow me on other stuff. Fantastic. I don't know. I guess I'm glad that it's like a weekday for a scuff stream, you know? It's kind of wild. Okay. Here's yep. Yep. Hey. Hey, that one worked. Good work, Horo the Wise. So that is, I'll have to Stream Elements. You are an unfortunate evil upon the world. You can quote me on that too. Terrible evil. I like that they do the sponsorships, but from what I've heard, though, they are not a very ethically good company, unfortunately. Um, mm, do 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 do. I'm gonna wait for you. Yeah, no bueno. Okay. We are here to read, and that's what I'm going to do, because despite all of the shenanigans and the scuff, I have hope for White Fang, and I'm hoping that the next couple chapters will get him on the right course. So let's return to part 4, chapter 6. Let's see here. Go over there and click the button. There. Chapter 6, The Love Master. Oh my. Love Master. That's the name. Okay. Focus. The Love Master. As White Fang watched Weedon Scott approach, he bristled and snarled to advertise that he would not submit to punishment. 24 hours had passed since he had slashed open the hand that was now bandaged and held up by a sling to keep the blood out of it. In the past, White Fang had experienced delayed punishments, and he apprehended that such a one was about to befall him. How could it be otherwise? He had committed what was to him sacrilege, sunk his fangs into the holy flesh of a god, and of a superior god at that. In the nature of things and of intercourse with gods, something terrible awaited him. The god sat down several feet away. White Fang could see nothing dangerous in that. When the gods administered punishment, they stood on their legs. Besides, this god had no club, no whip, no firearm, and furthermore, he himself was free. No chain nor stick bound him. He could escape into safety while the god was scrambling to his feet. In the meantime, he would wait and see. The god remained quiet, made no movement, and White Fang's snarl slowly dwindled to a growl that ebbed down in his throat and ceased. Then the god spoke, and at the first sound of his voice the hair rose on White Fang's neck and the growl rushed up in his throat. But the god made no hostile movement and went on calmly talking. For a time, White Fang growled in unison with him, a correspondence of rhythm being established between growl and voice. But the god talked on interminably. He talked to White Fang as White Fang had never been talked to before. He talked softly and soothingly, with a gentleness that somehow, somewhere, touched White Fang. In spite of himself and all the pricking warnings of his instinct, White Fang began to have confidence in this god. He had a feeling of security that was belied by all his experience with men. After a long time, the god got up and went into the cabin. White Fang scanned him apprehensively when he came out. He had neither whip nor club nor weapon, nor was his uninjured hand behind his back hiding something. He sat down as before, in the same spot, several feet away. He held out a small piece of meat. White Fang pricked his ears and investigated it suspiciously, managing to look at the same time both at the meat and the god, alert for any overt act, his body tense and ready to spring away at the first sign of hostility. Still, the punishment delayed. The god merely held near to his nose a piece of meat, and about the meat there seemed nothing wrong. Still, White Fang suspected, and though the meat was proffered to him with short, inviting thrusts of the hand, he refused to touch it. The gods were all wise, and there was no telling what masterful treachery lurked behind that apparently harmless piece of meat. In past experience, especially in dealing with squaws, meat and punishment had often been disastrously related. In the end, the god tossed the meat on the snow at White Fang's feet. He smelled the meat carefully, but he did not look at it. While he smelled it, he kept his eyes on the god. Nothing happened. He took the meat into his mouth and swallowed it. Still, nothing happened. The god was actually offering him another piece of meat. Again, he refused to take it from the hand, and again it was tossed to him. This was repeated a number of times. But there came a time when the god refused to toss it. He kept it in his hand, steadfastly proffered it. The meat was good meat, and White Fang was hungry. Bit by bit, infinitely cautious, he approached the hand. At last the time came that he decided to eat the meat from the hand. He never took his eyes from the god, thrusting his head forward with ears flattened back and hair involuntarily rising and cresting on his neck. Also, a low growl rumbled in his throat as warning that he was not to be trifled with. He ate the meat, and nothing happened. piece by piece he ate all the meat, and nothing happened. Still, the punishment delayed. He licked his chops and waited. The god went on talking. In his voice was kindness, something of which White Fang had no experience whatever, and within him it aroused feelings which he had likewise never experienced before. He was aware of a certain strange satisfaction, as though some need were being gratified, as though some void in his being were being filled. Then again came the prod of his instinct, and the warning of past experience. The gods were ever crafty, and they had unguessed ways of attaining their ends. Ah, he had thought so. There it came now, the god's hand, cunning to hurt, thrusting out at him, descending upon his head. But the god went on talking. His voice was soft and soothing. In spite of the menacing hand, the voice inspired confidence. And in spite of the assuring voice, the hand inspired distrust. White Fang was torn by conflicting feelings, impulses. It seemed he would fly to pieces. So terrible was the control he was exerting, holding together by an unwanted decision the counter forces that struggled within him for mastery. He compromised. He snarled and bristled and flattened his ears, but he neither snapped nor sprang away. The hand descended. Nearer and nearer it came. It touched the ends of his upstanding hair. He shrank down under it. It followed down after him, pressing more closely against him. Shrinking, almost shivering, he still managed to hold himself together. It was a torment, this hand that touched him and violated his instinct. He could not forget in a day all the evil that had been wrought him at the hands of men, but it was the will of the god, and he strove to submit. The hand lifted and descended again in a patting, caressing movement. This continued, but every time the hand lifted, the hair lifted under it, and every time the hand descended, the ears flattened down, and a cavernous growl surged in his throat. White Fang growled and growled with insistent warning. By this means he announced that he was prepared to retaliate for any hurt he might receive. There was no telling when the god's ulterior motive might be disclosed. At any moment that soft, confidence-inspiring voice might break forth in a roar of wrath, the gentle and caressing hand transform itself into a vice-like grip to hold him helpless and administer punishment. But the god talked on, softly, and ever the hand rose and fell with non-hostile pats. White Fang experienced dual feelings. It was distasteful to his instinct. It restrained him, opposed the will of him toward personal liberty, and yet it was not physically painful. On the contrary, it was even pleasant in a physical way. The patting movement slowly and carefully changed to a rubbing of the ears about their base, and the physical pleasure even increased a little. Yet he continued to fear, and he stood on guard, expectant of an unguessed evil, alternately suffering and enjoying as one feeling or the other came uppermost and swayed him. "Well, I'll be gosh swoggled." "Well, I'll be gosh swoggled." So spoke Matt, coming out of the cabin, his sleeves rolled up, a pan of dirty dishwater in his hands, arrested in the act of emptying the pan by the sight of Weedon Scott, patting White Fang. At the instant his voice broke the silence, White Fang leaped back, snarling savagely at him. Matt regarded his employer with grieved disapproval. "If you don't mind my expressing my feelings, Mr. Scott, I'll make free to say you're 17 kinds of a damn fool, and all of 'em different, and then some." Weedon Scott smiled. With a superior air, gained his feet, and walked over to White Fang. He talked soothingly to him, but not for long, then slowly put out his hand, rested it on White Fang's head, and resumed the interrupted patting. White Fang endured it, keeping his eyes fixed suspiciously, not upon the man that petted him, but upon the man that stood in the doorway. Welcome in, Mara. It's been a minute. I hope you're doing well. You might be a #1 tip-top mining expert. All right, all right. The dog musher delivered himself oracularly. Oracularly. What a word. I need to know if I'm saying that correctly. All right, hold on. To the dictionary. Oracularly. Well, oracularly. 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 Okay. Oracularly. That is of the nature of resembling or suggesting an oracle, giving forth utterances or decisions as if by special inspiration of authority. Ambiguous, obscure, portentous, ominous. Well, I'll be gosh woggled. Goodness. The dog musher delivered himself oracularly. But you missed the chances of your life when you was a boy and didn't run off and join a circus. White Fang snarled at the sound of his voice, but this time did not leap away from under the hand that was caressing his head and the back of his neck with long, soothing strokes. It was the beginning of the end for White Fang. The ending of the old life and the reign of hate. A new and incomprehensibly fairer life was dawning. It required much thinking and endless patience on the part of Weedon Scott to accomplish this. And on the part of White Fang it required nothing less than a revolution. He had to ignore the urges and promptings of instinct and reason, defy experience, give the lie to life itself. Welcome in 0DN115. Oh, thank you, Higara. My goodness, all of these things happening at once. We've got Mara popping in. Warrior cats. Yeah. Oh yeah, Warrior Cats. I haven't thought about those in like 20 years. Those were good books. I like those. But yeah. 0DN115. Welcome in. Do you just prefer DN or 0? One or the other? Also, Tiger Faye, thank you for the lurk. Your library dues. The gifted subs are your library dues. Well, how many books did you have out that you needed to pay library dues? My goodness. 0 is good. Okay, 0 it'll be. Oh. All right, let's return to the story. Okay, click. There we go. White Fang snarled at the sound of his voice, but this time, okay, I was further along than this. Give the lie to life itself. That last line in that paragraph is the beginning of all hope for White Fang. He had to ignore the urges and promptings of instinct and reason, defy experience, give the lie to life itself. Life as he had known it not only had no place in it for much that he now did, but all the currents had gone counter to those to which he now abandoned himself. In short, when all things were considered, he had to achieve an orientation far vaster than the one he had achieved at the time he came voluntarily in from the wild and accepted Grey Beaver as his lord. At that time he was a mere puppy, soft from the making, without form, ready for the thumb of circumstance to begin its work upon him. But now it was different. The thumb of circumstance had done its work only too well. By it he had been formed and hardened into the fighting wolf, fierce and implacable, unloving and unlovable. To accomplish the change was like a reflux of being. And this when the plasticity of youth was no longer his, when the fiber of him had become tough and knotty, when the warp and the woof of him, the warp and the woof, when the warp and the woof of him had made of him an adamantine texture, harsh and unyielding, when the face of his spirit had become iron, and all his instincts and axioms had crystallized into set rules, cautions, dislikes, and desires. Yet again, in this new orientation, it was the thumb of circumstance that pressed and prodded him, softening that which had become hard and remolding it into fairer form. Weedon Scott was in truth this thumb. Weedon Scott was in truth this thumb. Just, okay, sure. He is the thumb of circumstance. That is funny to me. I don't know why. I'm gonna write that down. Thumb. That, I don't know why, is so amusing to me. Okay. Moving on. Truth of the thumb. Okay. I got this. I got this. I can do it. Welcome in, Charlie P. P.Y. Weedon Scott was in truth this thumb. He had gone to the roots of White Fang's nature, and with kindness touched to life potencies that had languished and well nigh perished. One such potency was love. It took the place of like, which latter had been the highest feeling that thrilled him in his intercourse with the gods. But this love did not come in a day. It began with like, and out of it slowly developed. White Fang did not run away, though he was allowed to remain loose, because he liked this new god. This was certainly better than the life he had lived in the cage of Beauty Smith, and it was necessary that he should have some god. The lordship of man was a need of his nature. The seal of his dependence on man had been set upon him in that early day when he turned his back on the wild and crawled to Grey Beaver's feet to receive the expected beating. This seal had been stamped upon him again and irradicably on his second return from the wild, when the long famine was over and there was fish once more in the village of Grey Beaver. And so, because he needed a god and because he preferred Weedon Scott to Beauty Smith, White Fang remained. In acknowledgment of fealty, he proceeded to take upon himself the guardianship of his master's property. He prowled about the cabin while the sled dog slept, and the first night visitor to the cabin fought him off with a club until Weedon Scott came to the rescue. But White Fang soon learned to differentiate between thieves and honest men, to appraise the true value of step and carriage. The man who traveled, loud-stepping the direct line to the cabin door, he let alone, though he watched him vigilantly until the door opened and he received the endorsement of the master. But the man who went softly, by circuitous ways, peering with caution, seeking after secrecy, that was the man who received no suspension of judgment from White Fang, and who went away abruptly, hurriedly, and without dignity. Hurriedly. That's a good word, hurriedly. I don't think I use that in common. Yeah. It's not something that's in my rotation of common vernacular. And who went away abruptly, hurriedly, and without dignity. Weedon Scott had set himself the task of redeeming White Fang, or rather, of redeeming mankind from the wrong it had done White Fang. It was a matter of principle and conscience. He felt that the ill done White Fang was a debt incurred by man, and that it must be paid. And so, he went out of his way to be especially kind to the fighting wolf. Each day he made it a point to caress and pet White Fang, and to do it at length. At first, suspicious and hostile, White Fang grew to like this petting. But there was one thing that he never outgrew: his growling. Growl he would from the moment the petting began until it ended. But it was a growl with a new note in it. A stranger could not hear this note, and to a stranger the growling of White Fang was an exhibition of primordial savagery, nerve-wracking and blood-curdling. But White Fang's throat had become harsh-fibered from the making of ferocious sounds through the many years since his first little rasp of anger in the lair of his cubhood, and he could not soften the sounds of that throat now to express the gentleness he felt. Nevertheless, Weedon Scott's ear and sympathy were fine enough to catch the new note, all but drowned in the fierceness. The note that was the faintest hint of a croon of content and that none but he could hear. As the days went by, the evolution of like into love was accelerated. White Fang himself began to grow aware of it, though in his consciousness he knew not what love was. It manifested itself to him as a void in his being, a hungry, aching, yearning void that clamored to be filled. It was a pain and an unrest, and it received easement only by the touch of the new god's presence. At such times, love was a joy to him, a wild, keen, thrilling satisfaction. But when away from his god the pain and the unrest returned, the void in him sprang up and pressed against him with its emptiness, and the hunger gnawed and gnawed unceasingly. White Fang was in the process of finding himself. In spite of the maturity of his years and of the savage rigidity of the mold that had formed him, his nature was undergoing an expansion. There was a burgeoning within him of strange feelings and unwanted impulses. His old code of conduct was changing. In the past he had liked comfort and surcease from pain, disliked discomfort and pain, and he had adjusted his actions accordingly. But now it was different. Because of this new feeling within him, he oftentimes elected discomfort and pain for the sake of his God. Thus, in the early morning, instead of roaming and foraging or lying in a sheltered nook, he would wait for hours on the cheerless cabin stoop for a sight of the god's face. At night, when the god returned home, White Fang would leave the warm sleeping place he had burrowed in the snow in order to receive the friendly snap of fingers and the word of greeting. Meat, even meat itself, he would forego to be with his god, to receive a caress from him, or to accompany him down into the town. Like had been replaced by love, and love was the plummet dropped down into the deeps of him where like had never gone. And responsive, out of his deeps had come the new thing: love. That which was given unto him did he return. This was a god indeed, a love god, a warm and radiant god, in whose light White Fang's nature expanded as a flower expands under the sun. But White Fang was not demonstrative. He was too old, too firmly molded to become adept at expressing himself in new ways. He was too self-possessed, too strongly poised in his own isolation. Too long had he cultivated reticence, aloofness, and moroseness. He had never barked in his life, and he could not now learn to bark a welcome when his god approached. He was never in the way, never extravagant nor foolish in the expression of his love. He never ran to meet his god. He waited at a distance, but he always waited, was always there. His love partook of the nature of worship, dumb, inarticulate, a silent adoration. Only by the steady regard of his eyes did he express his love, and by the unceasing following with his eyes of his god's every movement. Also, at times, when his god looked at him and spoke to him, he betrayed an awkward self-consciousness, caused by the struggle of his love to express itself and his physical inability to express it. He learned to adjust himself in many ways to his new mode of life. It was borne in upon him that he must let his master's dogs alone, yet his dominant nature asserted itself, and he had first to thrash them into an acknowledgment of his superiority and leadership. This accomplished, he had little trouble with them. They gave trail to him when he came and went on or walked among them, and when he asserted his will, they obeyed. In the same way, he came to tolerate Matt as a possession of his master. Oh my goodness. As a possession of his master. His master rarely fed him. Matt did that. It was his business. Yet White Fang divined that it was his master's food he ate, and that it was his master who thus fed him vicariously. Matt, it was who tried to put him into the harness and make him haul sled with the other dogs, but Matt failed. It was not until Weedon Scott put the harness on White Fang and worked him that he understood. He took it as his master's will that Matt should drive him and work him just as he drove and worked his master's other dogs. Different from the Mackenzie toboggans were the Klondike sleds with runners under them, and different was the method of driving the dogs. There was no fan formation of the team. The dogs worked in single file, one behind another, hauling on double traces. And here, in the Klondike, the leader was indeed the leader. The wisest as well as strongest dog was the leader, and the team obeyed him and feared him. That White Fang should quickly gain this post was inevitable. He could not be satisfied with less. As Matt learned after much inconvenience and trouble, White Fang picked out the post for himself, and Matt backed his judgment with strong language after the experiment had been tried. But, though he worked in the sled in the day, White Fang did not forego the guarding of his master's property in the night. Thus he was on duty all the time, ever vigilant and faithful, the most valuable of all the dogs. That's really eccentric language for a dog's point of view. I agree. It's definitely eclectic. But I think this book was written in 1906. So Jack London's use of language is very different than modern day execution of language. I think he had no trouble fully expressing that this was an incredibly intelligent dog. Well, wolf dog, I should say. And I think those complex thoughts were because of his intelligence. And I don't know that anything written in modern context has brought forth that same complexity of intelligence that White Fang portrays in this book. At least nothing comes to mind. I don't know, I could do some digging. I'm sure I could find something. Making free to spit out what's in me, Matt said one day. I beg to state that you was a wise guy, all right, when you paid the price you did for that dog. You clean swindled Beauty Smith on top of pushing his face in with your fist. A recrudescence of anger. Ooh, that is a banger of a word. Recrudescence. Recrudescence. Did I spell that correctly? That is the word. A breaking out afresh or into renewed activity, revival, or a reappearance in active existence. Recrudescence. Said perfectly, but man, that is an interesting word. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Recrudescence. Well, there you go. A recrudescence of anger glinted in Weedon Scott's gray eyes, and he muttered savagely, "The beast." In the late spring, a great trouble came to White Fang. Without warning, the love master disappeared. There had been warning, but White Fang was unversed in such things and did not understand the packing of a grip. He remembered afterward that this packing had preceded the master's disappearance, but at the time he suspected nothing. That night he waited for the master to return. At midnight, the chill wind that blew drove him to shelter at the rear of the cabin. There he drowsed, only half asleep, his ears keyed for the first sound of the familiar step. But at 2 in the morning, his anxiety drove him out to the cold front stoop, where he crouched and waited. But no master came. In the morning, the door opened and Matt stepped outside. White Fang gazed at him wistfully. There was no common speech by which he might learn what he wanted to know. The days came and went, but never the master. White Fang, who had never known sickness in his life, became sick. He became very sick, so sick that Matt was finally compelled to bring him inside the cabin. Also, in writing to his employer, Matt devoted a postscript to White Fang. Weedon Scott, reading the letter down in Circle City, came upon the following. That damn wolf won't work, won't eat, ain't got no spunk left. All the dogs is licking him, wants to know what has become of you, and I don't know how to tell him. Maybe he is going to die. It was as Matt had said. White Fang had ceased eating, lost heart, and allowed every dog of the team to thrash him. In the cabin he lay on the floor, near the stove, without interest in food, in Matt, nor in life. Matt might talk gently to him or swear at him, it was all the same. He never did more than turn his dull eyes upon the man, then drop his head back to the customary position on his forepaws. And then, one night, Matt, reading to himself with moving lips and mumbled sounds, was startled by a low whine from White Fang. He had got upon his feet, his ears cocked forward toward the door, and he was listening intently. A moment later, Matt heard a footstep. The door opened, and Weedon Scott stepped in. The two men shook hands, and Scott looked around the room. "Where's the wolf?" he asked. Then he discovered him standing where he had been lying, near to the stove. He had not rushed forward after the manner of other dogs. He stood watching and waiting. "Holy smoke!" Matt exclaimed. "Look at him wag his tail!" Weedon Scott strode half across the room toward him, at the same time calling him. White Fang came to him, not with a great bound, yet quickly. He was awkward from self-consciousness, but as he drew near, his eyes took on a strange expression. Something, an incommunicable vastness of feeling, rose up into his eyes as a light and shone forth. "He never looked at me that way all the time you was gone," Matt commented. Weedon Scott did not hear. He was squatting down on his heels, face to face with White Fang and petting him, rubbing at the roots of the ears, making long, caressing strokes down the neck to the shoulders, tapping the spine gently with the ball of his fingers. And White Fang was growling responsively, the crooning note of the growl more pronounced than ever. But that was not all. What of his joy, the great love in him, ever surging and struggling to express itself, succeeded in finding a new mode of expression. He suddenly thrust his head forward and nudged his way in between the master's arm and body. And here, confined, hidden from view all except his ears, no longer growling, he continued to nudge and snuggle. The two men looked at each other. Scott's eyes were shining. "Gosh! Gosh!" said Matt in an awe-stricken voice. "Golly Williker! Gosh! Ho-ho!" A moment later, when he had recovered himself, he said, "I always insisted that wolf was a dog. Look at him." With the return of the Love Master. Every time. The Love Master. With the return of the Love Master, White Fang's recovery was rapid. 2 nights and a day he spent in the cabin. Then he sallied forth. That's a great phrase. He sallied forth into the brink. Then he sallied forth. The sled dogs had forgotten his prowess. They remembered only the latest, which was his weakness and sickness. At the sight of him as he came out of the cabin, they sprang upon him. Now accepting. I agree, Bear. It is a good vocabulary. Recrudescence is a great word. 0. Now accepting applications for Love Master. Lol. Yeah, I guess so. With the return of the Love Master. Every time. Start of this paragraph. With the return of the Love Master, White Fang's recovery was rapid. 2 nights and a day he spent in the cabin. Then he sallied forth. The sled dogs had forgotten his prowess. They remembered only the latest, which was his weakness and sickness. At the sight of him as he came out of the cabin, they sprang upon him. Talk about your rough houses, Matt murmured gleefully, standing in the doorway and looking on. Give 'em hell, you wolf, give 'em hell. And then some. White Fang did not need the encouragement. The return of the Love Master was enough. Life was flowing through him again, splendid and indomitable. He fought from sheer joy, finding in it an expression of much that he had felt and that otherwise was without speech. There could be but one ending. The team dispersed in ignominious defeat. And it was not until after dark that the dogs came sneaking back, one, by meekness and humility signifying their fealty to White Fang. Having learned to snuggle, White Fang was guilty of it often. It was the final word. He could not go beyond it. The one thing of which he had always been particularly jealous was his head. He had always disliked to have it touched. It was the wild in him, the fear of hurt and of the trap, that had given rise to the panicky impulses to avoid contacts. It was a mandate of his instinct that his head must be free. And now, with the Love Master, his snuggling was the deliberate act of putting himself in a position of hopeless helplessness. It was an expression of perfect confidence, of absolute self-surrender, as though he said, I put myself into thy hands. Work thou thy will with me. One night, not long after the return, Scott and Matt sat at a game of cribbage preliminarily to going to bed. 15-2, 15-4, and a pair makes 6. Matt was pegging up when there was an outcry. For context, if you've never played cribbage, it's like a whole board with a bunch of holes, and there's these little wooden pegs that you put in the board, and as you progress along the track, you're pegging up. The more you know. Good game. I have a couple of friends that play cribbage. I'm really surprised. It's kind of it's an older, old-fashioned game. Anyway, the more you know. 15-2, 15-4, and a pair makes 6, Matt was pegging up, when there was an outcry and sound of snarling without. They looked at each other, and they started to rise to their feet. The wolf's nailed somebody, Matt said. A wild scream of fear and anguish hastened them. Bring a light, Scott shouted as he sprang outside. Matt followed with the lamp, and by its light they saw a man lying on his back in the snow. His arms were folded, one above the other across his face and throat. Thus he was trying to shield himself from White Fang's teeth, and there was a need for it. White Fang was in a rage, wickedly making his attack on the most vulnerable spot. From shoulder to wrist of the crossed arms, the coat sleeves, blue flannel shirt, and undershirt were ripped in rags, while the arms themselves were terribly slashed and streaming blood. All this the two men saw in the first instant. The next instant, Weedon Scott and had White Fang by the throat and was dragging him clear. White Fang struggled and snarled, but made no attempt to bite, while he quickly quieted down at a sharp word from the master. Matt helped the man to his feet. As he arose, he lowered his crossed arms, exposing the bestial face of Beauty Smith. The dog musher let go of him precipitately, with action similar to that of a man who has picked up live fire. Beauty Smith blinked in the lamplight and looked about him. He caught sight of White Fang and terror rushed into his face. At the same moment, Matt noticed two objects lying in the snow. He held the lamp close to them, indicating them with his toe for his employer's benefit, a steel dog chain and a stout club. Weedon Scott saw and nodded. Not a word was spoken. The dog musher laid his hand on Beauty Smith's shoulder and faced him to the right about. No word needed to be spoken. Beauty Smith started. In the meantime, the Love Master was every time. In the meantime, the Love Master was patting White Fang and talking to him. Tried to steal you, eh? And you wouldn't have it. Well, he made a mistake, didn't he? Must have thought he had hold of 17 devils, the dog musher snickered. Terrible word. Snickered. We'll just say it that way. The must have thought had hold of 17 devils, the dog musher snickered. White Fang, still wrought up and bristling, growled and growled, the hair slowly lying down, and the crooning note remote and dim, but growing in his throat. Oh my goodness. Oh my lord. Okay. We are between sections. So this last part is part 5. This is the end of the book. Well, obviously, we have 5 more chapters, so it's not the end. But this is the last part, section 5 of the book. Yes. You have arrived right exactly on time. That reminds me of something I've seen. A wizard arrives especially when exactly when he wants to, or something. I don't know, the implication there, Fallen, is that you are a wizard. I guess. Anyway, we are between sections. I can probably read one more chapter before I'm going to be forced to have some kind of break. So I'll get cooking on that. We are about, I'd say 70 pages are left in the book, give or take. So I'm probably going to read one more chapter, and that way we don't have to have any more ad breaks, and then I'll have 4 more chapters to read on Friday to wrap this bad boy up. So, all right, we'll go here. We have a nice picture here. It's interesting. It looks like some kind of field. It's kind of hard to tell. Like some of the other lithographs in this book, the acid from the paper has faded the walnut ink. So it's very hard to tell. I wonder if I search for the image, if we can find it. Oh, this might be better. To the internet. What do we got here? Oh, well, it's got all of this stuff on it around, but you can actually see a great deal more, some kind of field, and there's some houses in the background. So what do we have? White Fang high res stock photo. Interesting. And this image is a public domain image, which means either the copyright has expired or the image holder has waived the copyright. It is imperfections as it's either historical or a reportage. It is indeed historical. None of this part of the book, I think, is relevant to this part here. Why is there teeth? I don't know. Why is there a creepy child with a thumb in his mouth? I don't know. But there we go. So yes, this picture is poorly faded, but yes, some kind of field with trees in the foreground and buildings in the background and rolling hills and clouds. Anyway. Okay. Chapter 1. Today is the last chapter. And as a reminder, hydrate, caffeinate. Be sure to take care of yourselves. and we'll get cooking. Chapter 1, or Part 5, Chapter 1, The Long Trail. It was in the air. White Fang sensed the coming calamity even before there was tangible evidence of it. In vague ways, it was borne in upon him that a change was impending. He knew not how, nor why, yet he got his feel of the oncoming event from the gods themselves. In ways subtler than they knew, they betrayed their intentions to the wolf dog that haunted the cabin stoop, and that, though he never came inside the cabin, knew what went on inside their brains. "Listen to that, will you?" the dog musher exclaimed at supper one night. Weedon Scott listened. Through the door came a low, anxious whine, like a sobbing under the breath that has just grown audible. Then came the long sniff, as White Fang reassured himself that his god was still inside and had not yet taken himself off in mysterious and solitary flight. It's like when my dog or my cats know I'm going traveling somewhere. They're like, "Oh, she's bringing out the bag. You know what that means? She's going to be gone." Sus. There's sus afoot. "I do believe that wolf's on to you," the dog musher said. Weedon Scott looked across at his companion with eyes that almost pleaded, though this was given the lie by his words. "What the devil can I do with a wolf in California?" he demanded. "That's what I say," Matt answered. "What the devil can you do with a wolf in California?" It sounds like the beginning of a joke. What the devil can you do with a wolf in California? I don't know. We'll see." But this did not satisfy Weedon Scott. The others seemed to be judging him in a non-committal sort of way. "Man's dogs would have no show against him," Scott went on. "He'd kill them on sight. If he didn't bankrupt me with damage suits, the authorities would take him away from me and electrocute him. Oof." "He's a downright murderer, I know," was the dog musher's comment. Yes, correct. Weedon Scott looked at him suspiciously. "It would never do," he said decisively. "It would never do," Matt concurred. "Why, you'd have to hire a man specially to take care of him." The other's suspicion was allayed. He nodded cheerfully. In the silence that followed, the low, half-sobbing whine was heard at the door, and then the long, questing sniff. Sniff! I have an emote for sniff. He is sniffing by the door. Good sniffs. Big sniffs. The others, okay. The questing sniff. In the silence that followed, the low, half-sobbing whine was heard at the door, and then the long, questing sniff. "There's no denying he thinks a hell of a lot of you," Matt said. The other glared at him in sudden wrath. "Damn it all, man, I know my own mind and what's best." "I'm agreeing with you, only..." "Only what?" Scott snapped out. "Only..." The dog musher began softly, then changed his mind and betrayed a rising anger of his own. "Well, you needn't get so all fired up, head up about it. Judging by your actions, one think you didn't know your own mind." Weedon Scott debated with himself for a while and then said more gently, "You are right, Matt. I don't know my own mind, and that's what's the trouble. Why, it would be rank ridiculousness for me to take that dog along," he broke out after another pause. "I am agreeing with you," was Matt's answer, and again his employer was not quite satisfied with him. "But how in the name of the great..." Is that a word? Sardana Palace. We're gonna Sardana Palace. I don't know if that's a word. That is a Greek word. Is a god. I can't even say that word either. We shall search. Maybe there's pronunciation. Today I learned Sardinal. What? Sardanapalus. 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 Okay. Sardanapalus. Sardanapalus was, according the Greek writers, Ctesias, the last king of Assyria, although in fact Azur Umbalit II holds that distinction. Ctesias' book Persia is lost, but we know of its contents by later compilations and from the work of Diordus. Okay, so Greek is not a language that I can speak. The more you know. Cuff. Cacough. All right. He just whipped that out like it was like nothing. Just all right. I've lost over here. Okay. Why it would be rank ridiculousness for me to take that dog along, he broke out after another pause. I'm agreeing with you, was Matt's answer, and again his employer was not quite satisfied with him. But how in the name of the great Sardanapolis? Oh my god. Okay. The great Sardanapolis. He knows you're going. He knows you're going is what gets me, the dog musher continued innocently. It's beyond me, Matt, Scott answered with a mournful shake of the head. Then came the day when, through the open cabin door, White Fang saw the fatal grip on the floor, and the love master packing things into it. Also, there were comings and goings, and the erstwhile placid atmosphere of the cabin was vexed with strange perturbations and unrest. Here was indubitable evidence. White Fang had already sensed it. He now reasoned it. His god was preparing for another flight, and since he had not taken him with him before, so now he could look to be left behind. That night he lifted the long wolf howl. As he howled in his puppy days when he fled back from the wild to the village to find it vanished and naught but a rubbish heap. To mark the site of Grey Beaver's teepee, so now he pointed his muzzle to the cold stars and told to them his woe. Inside the cabin, the two men had just gone to bed. He's gone off his food again, Matt remarked from his bunk. There was a grunt from Mead and Scott's bunk, and a stir of blankets. From the way he cut up the other time you went away, I wouldn't wonder this time but what he died. The blankets in the other bunk stirred irritably. Oh, shut up, Scott cried out through the darkness. You nag worse than a... Jesus, Murphy. Okay. You nag worse than a woman. Rude. I'm agreeing with you, the dog musher answered, and Weedon Scott was not quite sure whether or not the other had snickered. The next day, White Fang's anxiety and restlessness were even more pronounced. He dogged his master's heels whenever he left the cabin and haunted the front stoop when he remained inside. Through the open door, he could catch glimpses of the luggage on the floor. The grip had been joined by 2 large canvas bags and a box. Matt was rolling the master's blankets and fur robe inside a small tarpaulin. White Fang whined as he watched the operation. Later on, 2 Indians arrived. He watched them closely as they shouldered the luggage and were led off down the hill by Matt, who carried the bedding and the grip. But White Fang did not follow them. The master was still in the cabin. After a time, Matt returned. The master came to the door and called White Fang inside. You poor devil, he said gently, rubbing White Fang's ears and tapping his spine. I'm hitting the long trail, old man, where you cannot follow. Now give me a growl. The last goodbye growl. But White Fang refused to growl. Instead, and after a wistful, searching look, he snuggled in, burrowing his head out of sight between the master's arm and body. There she blows, Matt cried. From the Yukon arose the hoarse bellowing of a river steamboat. You've got to cut it short. Be sure and lock the front door. I'll go out the back. Get a move on. The door slammed at the same moment, and Weedon Scott waited for Matt to come around to the front. From inside the door came a low whining and sobbing. Then there was long, deep-drawn sniffs. You must take good care of him, Matt, Scott said as they started down the hill. Write and let me know how he gets along. Sure, the dog musher answered, but listen to that, will you? Both men stopped. White Fang was howling as dogs howl when their masters lie dead. He was voicing an utter woe, his cry bursting upward in great heart-breaking rushes, dying down into quavering misery, and bursting upward again with a rush upon rush of grief. Hi, Tiny. Hi, Wild. How are you both doing? I really enjoyed that rat stream. Well, it was like the rat slash, horror game you were playing earlier. But being a rat was kind of the coolest part of it. For me. It was really cool to watch. The stream is going well. White Fang has been rescued by Weedon Scott. And so all of the miseries and the pain of the earlier chapters of Section 4 has been into the labs was fun. It was. All of the earlier pain that White Fang experienced at the hands of Beauty Smith has been brought to a stop. And Weedon Scott is doing his level best to treat him with kindness. So, I hope you had a good stream. Welcome in. Let me take a second to hydrate. I'm in the last chapter for today. Then I'll have 4 chapters for Friday. Let's see. That last sentence there. He was voicing an utter woe, his cry bursting upward in great, heart-breaking rushes, dying down into quavering misery, and bursting upward again with a rush upon rush of grief. The Aurora was the first steamboat of the year for the outside, and her decks were jammed with prosperous adventurers and broken gold seekers, all equally as mad to get to the outside as they had been originally to get to the inside. Near the gangplank, Scott was shaking hands with Matt, who was preparing to go ashore, but Matt's hand went limp in the other's grasp as his gaze shot past and remained fixed on something behind him. Scott turned to see. Sitting on the deck, several feet away and watching wistfully, was White Fang. The dog musher swore softly in awe-stricken accents. Scott could only look in wonder. Did you lock the front door? Matt demanded. The other nodded and asked, how about the back? I'm gonna pull up this picture here. Look at him, so sad. He's a sad boy. So this is another one of these amazing prints by Charles Livingston Bull. White Fang was howling as dogs howl when their masters lie dead. Ah, buddy. Poor guy. We'll save that. I'm gonna repost that today. Oh, thank you, Tiny. I really appreciate you continuing the sub. That is so nice of you. Thank you so much. Yes. Beautiful, beautiful artwork on this one. I love all the gradation of gray from these softer French grays with the a little bit of yellow in them to these bluer, darker grays with Payne's gray in them. He's a sad boy. He needs a pets. More pets. All the doggo pets. You just bet I did, was the fervent reply. White Fang flattened his ears ingratiatingly, but remained where he was, making no attempt to approach. I'll have to take him ashore with me. Matt made a couple of steps toward White Fang, but the latter slid away from him. The dog musher made a rush of it, and White Fang dodged between the legs of a group of men. Ducking, turning, doubling, he slid about the deck, eluding the other's efforts to capture him. But when the love master spoke, White Fang came to him with prompt obedience. Won't come to the hand that's fed him all these months, the dog musher muttered resentfully. And you ain't never fed him after that first days of getting acquainted. I'm blamed if I can see how he works it out that you're the boss. Scott, who had been patting White Fang, suddenly bent closer and pointed out fresh-made cuts on his muzzle and a gash between the eyes. Matt bent over and passed his hand along White Fang's belly. We plumb forgot the window. He's all cut and gouged underneath. Must have butted clean through. Must have butted clean through it, bagosh. Bagosh. Bagosh! Oh my goodness. Must have butted clean through it, bagosh. That's a phrase. But Whedon Scott was not listening. He was thinking rapidly. The Aurora's whistle hooted a final announcement of departure. Men were scurrying down the gangplank to the shore. Matt loosened the bandana from his own neck and started to put it around White Fang's. Scott grasped the dog musher's hand. Goodbye, Matt, old man. About the wolf, you needn't write. You see, I've... What? The dog musher exploded. You don't mean to say... The very thing I mean. Here's your bandana. I'll write to you about him. Matt paused halfway down the gangplank. He'll never stand the climate, he shouted back, unless you clip him in warm weather. The gangplank was hauled in, and the Aurora swung out from the bank. Whedon Scott waved a last goodbye, and then he turned and bent over White Fang standing by his side. Now growl, damn you, growl, he said, as he patted the responsive head and rubbed the flattening ears. That was good. That was really good. I really enjoyed that. So, White Fang is getting his way after all. He's going south with his master on the Aurora. So, they locked the doors, we're good to go, and he just plowed his way right out the window. Hopefully he didn't take too much damage, given how thick a double coat is for fur. Probably okay. I doubt he's going to shave him. You never shave a double coated dog. It doesn't grow back right. You just can't do it. So that, my dear listeners, is where we're going to end today. So we have a little bit of content for next time. But we learned about Sardanapalus, the Greek king. We learned, what was the other one? Recrudescence, the breaking out of fresh, renewed activity or revival of reappearance in existence. Oracular, right? The giving forth of utterances of decisions. Lots of good words today. And this amazing picture, just absolutely in love with. Recrudescence. That's the word. It's a good word. Recrudescence. Yep. 10 out of 10. That's a $10 word. I doubt I'll have many opportunities to use that in conversation, but it's a good word. Okay. All my lovely friends, my dear listeners, let's find somebody lovely to go hop in and say hello to. What do we have? Da-da-da-da, girl with waiting for. Well, since Tiny is here and Wild is here, My options are now more limited than ever. We can go visit Tiger Fae. They're playing a lovely game. Harlequin's doing some art. I would love for all of you to get acquainted with my dear Harlequin, who is a hyena based, or a hyena VTuber based in Germany. Lovely, lovely artist. Mad talented too. So if you're ever looking for like what's the word? A live 2D or a new VTuber avatar, they're really spot on. Let's go visit Harlequin. Alloop. Let's see. Harley Quinn VT. So a little bit of art after. I'm gonna have to fix stream elements. Why are you like this? I don't know. All right, all aboard. Choo choo. Let's start the raid. Now I guess now leaving the library, and maybe a quick raid button. There we go. Just that a coupling. Da 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 da. That is a raid message that any follower can post. So if you want to just copy that, and we'll throw that in when we go visit Harlequin. So as we go to the brink.